Today, I'm going to show you how I built what started as a simple bookcase idea and ended up being something I've never seen done before. So, a few months ago, a repeat client emailed me about a bookcase for her sheet music, and it had to live in the same room as another piece I'd made for her. That earlier piece has such a unique detail that anything beside it risks feeling less interesting. So, my challenge was to create something new but cohesive, something that belonged without copying myself. I needed one detail to carry the whole piece, and that's when it clicked. I could deconstruct the curved transition from the bench and flip it perpendicular where the shelves meet the uprights. It was the same idea, even the same radius, but a completely new expression. Now, that kind of joinery was something I'd never done before, but that's the exact kind of thing I always want. I want to try something new and make something unique. Of course, first things first, I needed two mill boards for the uprights. I'm making this whole thing out of rift-sawn white oak to match the look of the bench, and also because rift-sawn tends to be more stable than flat-sawn, and this was a very welcome advantage considering the kind of joinery I was going to attempt. Case in point, I usually let boards rest overnight after the first milling pass so they can move if they're going to, but this did not move at all. It just shows how stable it can be. So I went straight to prepping them for glue up. Okay, I want to show you a trick I use every time I joint boards for a panel. It guarantees perfectly tight glue lines, even if your joint or fence isn't exactly 90 degrees, and here's the problem. You think your fence is square, but even a tiny deviation can create gaps or make the panel buckle during glue up, and once the glue dries, it's almost impossible to fix. So I use geometry in my favor. I mark one edge I for inside and the other O for outside. The I side goes against the fence and the O goes away from the fence. Then opposite orientations cancel any fence errors, giving you a perfect glue line every time. And here's a practical demonstration. I'm pretty confident in the squareness of my jointer, but I always do this just to make sure, and as you can see, it comes out perfect. With all of that out of the way, it was time to glue up the uprights and shelves, and it was pretty standard stuff. I didn't bother with alignment aids like dominoes because the boards were already very flat, and since I skipped a second milling pass before, everything was still well over final thickness. That meant I could take the whole assembly to the drum sander afterwards to clean up any squeeze out or minor misalignments with plenty of material to spare. Now, if you remember from the original design, the star of the show here is really the joinery between the uprights and shelves, and that's coming up, but having everything perfectly prepared, being flat, square, and all the same dimensions now was mandatory. The name of the game on this is precision, so taking the time now pays off at the end. I shared the trick I'm using here on my last video. You can watch it after this one, but this is a way I found to have a stop lock when cutting pieces that are longer than the slide fence, and it's pretty useful. Okay, cutting the uprights in the right dimension was easy because my table saw had the right size to cut this correctly. But the shelves are 48 inches or 47 and a quarter inches long, and my table saw is only 36 inches, so we're not going to be able to actually use any fence or anything on here to make it absolutely correct and perfect. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to square off one end using my crosscut sled. Okay, change of plans again. You probably noticed, but the duct from the desk collection did not allow the board to go through the whole cut. I missed, I don't know, about 3/4 of an inch here. I could probably just remove the duct or move it somewhere else, but I don't want to do that. And then I'm going to use my parallel guide from TSO with my track saw to cut the second crosscut in the exact dimension for all of the three shelves. Cool, now is the time to start that juicy joinery work, and you may have already figured this out, but the idea is that the shelves will connect to the uprights through a couple of notches. So the first thing I needed to do is to cut the notches that will receive the shelves on the uprights, and to do that, I needed to mark said notches on the uprights using the exact thickness of the shelves. Now, to cut the notches, I'm going to use my table saw, a miter gauge, and this rip flip thingy from Woodpeckers, hashtag not sponsored, to ensure that I had stops on either end of the cut. That also makes it easier to fine tune the notch if any adjustment is needed. Now, before I cut the final piece, I needed to run a few test cuts until I was happy with the setup, and for that, I'm using a scrap piece and a sacrificial MDF fence to ensure that I didn't have any blowouts on exit. Now you might be wondering why I'm using a normal blade and not a dado blade, and that's because I needed a full blade height to cut the notches. The dado blade can only go to about 2.5 to 3 inches. Once I was happy with the setup, I positioned the upright and went for it. The key here is that the notches on both sides have to be cut with the same fence position so everything lines up perfectly. So I didn't touch the fence, I just verified the setup with some test cuts. It's always a little nerve-wracking because if something is off, you're starting over, but that's exactly why you run tests, and in this case, everything landed exactly where I wanted. Then I flipped the uprights and made the matching cuts. Same fence, no changes. And I did the same on the second upright, and I didn't record it, but you get the point. I won't show all the cuts because the process is the same, but this piece had 3 shelves, so it's pretty much rinse and repeat at this point. I love when you can be confident in the setup you're using, either because you made a jig or you spend time fine-tuning things. It does take time, but you save time and a headache in the end, so it's totally worth it. Okay, cutting the joinery on the uprights wasn't too bad. I think I got it to a point where the shelves are going to fit pretty well. They're very well aligned and precisely located on both sides, so that's going to be great. But that got me thinking that there may be an opportunity for me to add another registration point that will help me square off the whole assembly whenever I'm gluing this up, as well as add a little bit more glue surface. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to actually add a dado from this side to this side, maybe just a 1/4 inch or maybe 5/16, and that's going to help the shelf get a registration point and become absolutely square with the uprights as well. To do that, I'm going to use a couple of scrap pieces of plywood, double-sided tape on here, and use a router to just go through there. Next step is we're going to cut the notches to have the shelves fit exactly where the joinery that we cut on the uprights is. And to be able to do that, what I'll do is I'm going to make a template. And I'm going to use my Shaper Origin for that. You can definitely create a template by hand by manually laying out and then cutting it as close to the line as possible. The most important piece is, 1, it fits, and 2, it's equal in all of the parts so that when you put the piece together, it's going to be all aligned and square. So I needed a template that let the shelves sit a 1/4 inch proud of the uprights, and the notch had to account for the dado. Luckily, the dado depth matched that review, so the notch only needed to match the upright thickness. This template had to be precise, so I transferred the measurements from the actual piece into Shaper Origin, added a 5/1000 offset for glue clearance, and cut it. Now, like everything else in woodworking, you can absolutely do this with other tools like a marking knife, a handsaw and chisel, maybe even a band saw with a little cleanup later on. But the Shaper is faster and extremely accurate, and since I have one, I used it. And to make it easier and precise to locate the templates on all shelves, I added some strips of plywood to register against 2 edges of the shelves and secured it with glue, and added a couple of drops of CA glue and accelerator to serve as clamps as the glue dries. To cut the notches, I first needed to remove most material with a jigsaw, so I used a thick marker and made sure not to go over those lines. Then I finalized it with a router and a flush trim bit, which, you know, there's always a little bit of risk of tear out. Okay, end of the day here for me, and should have stopped a little earlier, but as you can see here, there's a little bit of a tear out on the last piece that I was doing. The good thing is I have all the dust that I removed on the floor, and I was able to find a few chips and things that actually came out of the cut, and I think I found the piece that was here. So what I'm going to do is already kind of tested, but I think this piece here is actually the piece that actually matches in here. So I'll just go ahead and put some glue and a tape, let it glue up, and then tomorrow I'll come back and just kind of fix it. Good thing is this is the bottom piece, so it's not really going to show much, but I want to make sure that we have it fixed. Okay, that crisis was averted. The last thing I needed to do now was to finalize this joinery, squaring off the rounded corners left by the router bit. Now, all the joinery work was done. Time to make it pretty. I was now off to create the rounded corners you saw on the renders, and to do that, I'm going to use a 2¼ inch template I created out of 1/4 inch MDF. Same process as before, I marked with a thick Sharpie and proceeded to cut with the jigsaw to remove the bulk of the material. The only difference this time is that I'm actually using a templating bit from the top to cut the first 1/4 inch. And then I'm finalizing it with the flush trim bit from the bottom. Quick shout out to Drew Wheat from Woodworking. He creates this trim router base with an incredible dust collection attachment. I'm not affiliated, I'm just really impressed, so I'll leave a link below. And also, since we're talking dust, I've been using the Mullet Cyclone on my extractor, which I'm really enjoying. It separates really well, save money on bags, is easy to empty, and honestly it looks great. There's an affiliate link for that one, because apparently I also enjoy groceries. The top of the uprights received the same corner rounding treatment, and the process was exactly the same, so I'll speed it up for you. Okay, edge treatment is something I'm always intentional about because it can truly emphasize a certain design detail in the piece, but it can also ruin it if you choose the wrong option. For this piece, I was really over the fence between just breaking the edges or going with an 1/8 inch roundover. I ended up going with the roundover option after putting up a poll on Instagram, and mostly because the bench this client had also had the same edge profile, so this was another way to make this design even more cohesive. Now we were getting ready to glue up, and thankfully this design allowed me to present pretty much everything with the exception of where the shelves meet the uprights to not mess up with the tight fitting of the joinery. Another thing I like to do is to add some tape where two surfaces intersect to make it easier to clean up glue squeeze later on, and then it was time to get glue on this thing. And as you see me struggle to get this thing glued up, I wanted to thank you for sticking around with me through this point in the video. My goal is to really offer something that might help you in some way, be it inspiration, a trick or another, or even some possible entertainment, although I don't think I'm winning any awards in that category. Well, my mom thinks I'm entertaining, but anyways, what I was trying to say is that you sticking around through the end is the best way to show YouTube that this was a worthwhile video. And if you haven't yet, a like and subscribe always helps growing the channel and support more of this kind of content. But no pressure, and as always, thank you. I clamped the whole assembly with just 6 long clamps, including the 2 in the bottom that I had to use a connector from Bessie because I ran out of long clamps, but the end result was super satisfying. I think the decision to add the dado to get the shelves registered inside them was smart. The whole thing came out perfectly square. I was really happy so far, and this is the final stretch, prepping for finish. I fixed some knot holes at the bottom of the piece with a torch and black hot glue. I found this works really well. I just have some dripping there, use a steel block to press it down, and clean it up with a flush hand plane. I find this works better than epoxy for some smaller defects in less conspicuous areas. It speeds up the process substantially, and it cures almost as hard. I'll be finishing this with Rubio Monocoat, which is simple to apply but needs good prep. I sand to 180, blow off the dust, and check for swirl marks with the raking light. Alright friends, almost done. You've seen me use mineral spirits on this piece, and I do that not only because Rubio recommends that you clean up the piece as much as possible so that the product bonds correctly with the fibers, but also because I like to make sure that I didn't miss any spots or defects on the wood that I may have missed just from the use of the raking lights. And in fact, I did. I saw a few spots that need to be addressed. And so I'm going to show you those spots, and I'll show you what I'm going to do to address them. As I applied mineral spirits, I like to go back with a little pencil and just mark the spots because they may not be very visible after I come back and it dries up. And in this case, this one was kind of visible, but I'm going to show you another one here. So this one here isn't visible at all, just at the naked eye. But when I did apply the mineral spirits, I could see that there was a pretty big thing in here. So this one is going to be a little more difficult to figure out if I have addressed it right away. But I can always apply the mineral spirits again and see how I'm doing here. And you may have seen this tip before, but if not, don't worry, I'm not trying to smooth over the lower shelf. By adding a moist towel with a hot iron on top of small scratches or dents, the heat and steam work by causing the compressed wood fibers to swell and expand back to their original position. This process raises the grain, so make sure to lightly sand, and in most cases the dent will either disappear completely or become practically invisible. It works really well. I used 2 coats of Rubio Monocoat White to match the bench. Pigmented finishes are great on white oak. The pigment fills the grain and adds depth and contrast. I love this effect. And just like that, the piece was done, and I have to say I was really proud of how it turned out. That rounded long grain and end grain detail looks really cool, and the joinery of the shelves with the uprights looks simple but intriguing. The material selection in conjunction with the finish makes it look and feel refined. The client loved it too, which was incredibly reassuring. I would love to know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.